Hey everyone, so this is an invoice system and also a pay what you want system that I created for my own business, and I'm going to recreate it today for you live. So the idea is this here will generate an invoice in Ontraport, which clients can then see like this, right? They can pay it on the spot, and because the amount is always changing, once they enter their credit card information, they are then taken to a thank you page, which is a little bit complex, and I'm gonna go over it later, but this page will reload until we get a transaction status on the amount charged, and then the invoice will be marked as paid, and they'll be able to download the PDF version of it this way. So we'll also look at how to generate this PDF together. So first thing first, let's start by setting up our custom object in Ontraport. It's a fairly simple object, which we'll call invoice. So step 2, we'll add the fields to our object. We need 3 fields really, an amount, total. We also need PDF link, and finally, we need a status, which will be a drop down, just to status, unpaid and paid. And that's all we need for this object right now. So now let's set up our relationships. We will set up 2 relationships between invoice and contact. So first, the one where invoice is child of contact, because a contact can have multiple invoices, right? So in the contact record, we'll call this invoices and it will be related to the contact. Then I will have a second relationship, and this is going to be a one-to-one between contact and invoices, and you'll understand why we need this one later on. This relationship will be mainly used to pay the invoice. We need a one-to-one to relate them together and know which one we are paying, what amount, and so on. So we have our 2 relationships now. I'll display this like this, email amount status. Okay, now the next step is to create our first landing page to generate the invoice. It's really simple. So we need to select an invoice object here for this form. First step will be to have a form so we can create invoices on the fly. You could do it within Ontraport, but I find that this is really much easier. So first we'll ask for the email of the contact, and then we'll ask for an amount, and then we'll have a submit button, and that's pretty much it, really. So as it's published, using this form, we'll generate a new invoice object. We want a few things to happen when an invoice object is generated, and one of them is for an invoice page to be created, right? So this will be happening under pages, dynamic templates, new dynamic templates, created to invoices. So here, what I will do is have the invoice show either as paid or unpaid. And the way we'll do that, and in the display setting, we'll use this here. We use condition from the dynamic content, and we select the status field. And if it's unpaid, we'll show the unpaid one, right? And now it's paid, obviously, we'll show the paid one. So then what do we need? For the paid ones, they will want access to the PDF. So let's put that here. And for the unpaid one, we'll want them to pay us. So that's what the button will do. Then we could design something complex for the invoice, but right now I'm just gonna do something super simple like this. So this will be pay now. We link to an anchor on the page. will be download PDF, and it will be linking to a URL field, which is PDF link. Then the next step is we need on this page the actual payment form. And this payment form will be a contact form. Let's add email for now, but we will delete this later. We don't need this. We should have the email beforehand, right? So credit card information, submit. And now, two things I need to do. First, form settings. I need to pre-fill some fields. Unique ID of the contact. I will also do the email field because some gateways need an email. And then we will need to link them to the invoice that they are paying. So for the invoice, I will use the invoice field, unique ID. For the email, I will use the contacts email. And for the unique ID, well, I forgot, we don't need it because we have the email address, which is also unique. So now we are linking a contact with an invoice, right? The one that they are paying on the page. And this is in case they are paying multiple invoices. That's why we have a one-to-many relationships, so people can have multiple invoices. Then here in those parameters, we will do all of those to kind of slow down the flow of the payments. Okay, so now we have this. This button here should actually be linked. This block and this block should only display if the status is unpaid, right? Okay, so now we have our simple pay the unpaid invoice. Before I publish finally, I need to add this deposit product for €0 in my form. I forgot this part. I'm using the dummy gateway in this demo, but you need to use obviously an actual gateway for live system. So let's summarize what we have here. Two blocks that will display if the invoice is paid or unpaid. Alternatively, we have an invoice amount, and we have a form here where they can enter their credit card information, and they will then get to give you their credit card, and you can then charge that card for any amount. Thanks to the connection in form settings, we'll be knowing which invoice and for which amount we are paying. So now that this is done, the next step will be to set up our ClickFix account. We need a few things in ClickFix to be set up for this to work. First, you need to enter your domain name. We need Ontraport API keys. We need your Google keys to store the PDF somewhere. You can also use AWS storage or FTP. We have many options, but I'll be using Google in this example. And then you need to create a ClickFix token. And the ClickFix token is used for our magic hooks, which is kind of like our internal API, right? And those magic hooks need permissions because we wanted to make this safe. So in this case, I need PDF and log transaction plus another one. So add them. And then we need to be able to change the default card so we know which card to charge. All right. Don't need none of that stuff. Submit. And that will give me a token that I can use later on. Okay, and then the last thing I will be needing is a storage. So I'll create a new uploader module so I can store my PDF in my Google Drive, right? I'll be using public clicks here because we want people to be able to download them. Doesn't matter, file only is good. It only be for PDFs. So for the path, let's use invoices. This is good. So we are using the extension of the original file, single file, and we're good. So we have everything we need in ClickFix now. We have a token for our magic hook here, and in a few seconds we'll have our uploader token. Also, I've set up my domain. I have my API keys, and my Google is connected. For the Google, you only need the Drive permission. Now the next step here is to do what happens after this form here is filled up, and this is where the fun actually begins for the whole pay what you want systems. So I'll add some new fields in my contacts. All I need is really two fields: transaction status for current charge, I'll call it. It's a bit complex, but that's all right. And that will be a drop down with three options. My three options will be charge card, success, failure. So now that I have this field, I can then create my automation for this system. This campaign will trigger when my field is updated, and my field is updated to charge card. I want it for any contact in the account, and I want the contact to be moved back here whenever this field is set to current charge. And so I'll also be adding a rule here now that I have the field created, so we can update it. And sadly, because we cannot trigger campaigns from the form on a dynamic template yet, so transaction status will update it to charge card, successful payments, and so I will also need this. Okay, so when this field is updated, what happens? I will need two hooks, and those are from ClickFix. So you can find in the documentation more information, and we will build them together right now. So I can show you kind of the process I use. So the first thing we'll want to do is change the default credit card to the last card that was added. My token here comes from ClickFix, and it's this. Okay, so that will be my first hook, which I can add to my campaign. And this is to make sure we are using the card that the contact just entered. The contact ID, and that's it really. So then we need a second hook, which will be to log the actual transaction for the payment of the amount of the invoice. I will look for my log transaction webhook, and there it is. Okay, let's start with the example. Token will be exactly the same. I will use contact ID in this case because I have it. Well, contact ID. Then my product will be Ontraport services, which I'll charge for the amount of the field. For the gateway, you need to look into the account. When you select your gateway, you can see the ID. And this I don't need, and this I don't need either in this case. So this is really the simplest way to charge someone with this hook. You can have a lot more details if you read through the documentation. For example, you can set up recurring payments. You can set up pretty much anything Ontraport will let you do with this hook. For now, let's just add this to our campaign. And all I need here is paying invoice amounts. And so in our log transaction webhook, I forgot that we need to add and type equal charge to actually charge the card. So now here I'm charging the default card with my gateway. And the way you know if the transaction is successful or not is by using two goals. Both goals will check for the last invoice number to be updated, but one of them will look for the last credit card status to be a success, while the other one will look for the credit card status to be declined. And this is how you know, like the simplest way really to know if the transaction is good or not. I'll just add a go-to here. Okay, so if it's declined, I will simply update status of my transaction to failure, and I will exit. Whereas here, I need to do two things. I need to generate a PDF link, and I also need to update this to success. Let's set up the PDF link after this, because I want to move to the thank you page first, and you'll see how this works. Let's just save for now and go back to our pages. So our third page is really the trick to it for me, which is the thank you page. And in the thank you page, what we will do is based off a field that is merged inside the URL of the page, we will display different blocks. I'll make this super simple. Again, make your design. So first block will be we are charging the card, and that is only if the URL contains charge equal, and that's where we will be using the drop down here, right? So for example, in the case of charge card, I got charge card, I will be showing the charging card block. In case of success, we will show obviously the success block, and same thing, success. Save, and then our last block. Okay, so success or fail, and there you could add a form that will, throw them through the campaign again to charge the card if they update their card. So we've got our three blocks here. We've got our display settings. So now we need some ClickFix magic on this page. So let's start with our shortcode, right? First, I'll add my script to it. And then what we need to do here is we'll be submitting a hidden form every few seconds. And the goal of this is to make sure that the page reloads, and as the transaction status changes, we are able to show the right block. Let me do this quickly for you. It's pretty simple. So it's a contact field. We just need the unique ID in there. The unique ID will be pre-filled from the URL. Then we need a submit button. I'll publish this page now. And now remember how I was using this here? Well, basically, that's what our link will look like. So we want the URL to contain the unique ID. So we can pre-fill this form here. And then we want the URL to contain the charge more field. This. And by using that and reloading the form a few times, I will be able to have the transaction status be updated live in front of the customer. And that's how you're able to charge any amount, because the amount charged is happening in the automation. I will use this custom URL here. And I will also add this as the thank you URL here on my payment page. So what I will do in my shortcodes is, and obviously I know this, but it's all in the documentation. So show after 3 seconds, and after 3 seconds, I will just submit this block here. And I will also hide this block because the public doesn't need to see it. Okay, so now let's finish our automation by setting up the PDF webhook, and we are done basically. First, I'll need my token, same as here. Then what do I need? I need an object ID, I need an ID, and I need a field. And I'll also send a name in, which is gonna be the unique ID of the invoice. Storage is a storage token, and those are not mandatory, so I'm just gonna leave it at that because the page is simple enough and you can always adjust later. Let's go into our Ontraport now with all of this. It's easier to work from there. This is gonna go into this. Then object ID is gonna be my invoice object, which is this. The ID, because we send the hook from the contacts. To get the ID, we are gonna go through paying invoice ID. The field, how do you know field ID? Simply, let me show you a quick little demo. Right click here, inspect, elements, and if you go up a little bit, you can see here your field ID. Okay. For the URL, I'll be using the URL from the paying invoice. Again, quite simple. For the name, I will use the unique ID of the URL, and this will be replacing here the file name. And then the storage, I need this token here. And that's it really. This should be enough to generate a PDF for me. One last thing is this needs to only work for only contacts on previous weights, and we move them. It's quite important. Okay, then I will have a goal. Check that my PDF is generated, but this is just details. PDF link is updated. And that's mostly done. The one last thing I would need would be to update a field in the invoice to say this invoice is now paid. That's all there is to it really. Now, if you need to do just a pay what you want thing, basically you add a dollar amount field to the contact and you can just charge anyone anything from a form using this and sending them an invoice via email using this simple sequence of events. If you have questions, please join our Facebook group. Just write ClickFix, ClickFix, and we'll be helping you if you need it.